Good morning, everyone. Today, I wanted to share some of my ideas for building diverse, beloved community in my own path of paganism and beyond paganism. And while a lot of the examples and inspirations I will use come from my experiences as a Unitarian Universalist pagan, my ultimate goal is to make these ideas and methods accessible to anyone in any path, whether that be other UUs, humanists, atheists, Christians, anyone who feels called to do this work. And this is by no means an exhaustive list. So I'll start with a quick definition of paganism. In the broadest sense, this is the practice of earth-centered spirituality. In June of 2023, I did a sermon titled, "What is a UU Pagan?" And that can be found in the sermon archive of our website at frederickuu.org. If you want a deeper dive into Unitarian Universalist paganism, that could be a good starting point. Paganism is an umbrella term under which there are many paths, including African diaspora traditions such as Santeria and Hoodoo, some of which are syncretized with various forms of Christianity. There are Hellenic pagans, Kemetic pagans, Irish pagans, Slavic pagans, culturally specific folk magic pagans. You get the idea. My specific path is known as heathenry, which is the name for folks who practice Germanic and Scandinavian pre-Christian spiritual traditions. We'll explore a little bit more of that later in the sermon, as it is a very well-known fact amongst pagans that modern-day heathenry has a lot of work to do in the way of building diverse, beloved community. Paganism is not a perfect path, and in fact has just as many problematic aspects as any other path, as we will discuss. But the first step in our process, as I can see it, is naming the problem. So, building a diverse, beloved community in paganism is not the problem. That is the solution. That is the name of our work. If we are to name the problem, I think it would be more accurate to say that the problem is white supremacy is the ocean we swim in. It is often difficult for white folks to recognize the ocean we are in when we are born and raised in privilege solely based just on the color of our skin. So again, not an exhaustive list. I will be only illustrating 3 points today that address different perspectives on ways we can all do this work. The first one is communication. In his aptly named book, The Storytelling Animal, How Stories Make Us Human, author and professor Jonathan Gottschall writes, "The world's priests and shamans knew what psychology would later confirm. If you want a message to burrow into a human mind, work it into a story." So I encourage us to ask ourselves these questions in regards to our communities that we're a part of. What stories are we telling? Who are the heroes and villains of these stories, and who is not in the story? There's another wonderful book by Indigenous author Tyson Yunkaporta of the Appalachia clan in northern Queensland, Australia. It is titled Right Story, Wrong Story: How to Have Fearless Conversations in Hell. And in this book, Yunkaporta crosses various cultural and political divides by having conversations with a variety of people who are very different from himself. In this book, he writes, "In indigenous culture, language itself encodes memory. Different phrases and words and combinations of words can embody vast contexts of shared information. Narrative pathways through landscapes of knowledge are encoded in stories for the production, transmission, and storage of information. This is a profoundly human practice, one which arguably makes us human. Knowledge is more readily transferred into long-term memory in the form of a story. All the experiences of your life are processed through story making. This is what the aunties refer to as lore." So, having uncomfortable conversation starts with listening. I know as a white person who was assigned female at birth and raised as a female in American society, I've learned a lot of communication rules that are not conducive to open, honest dialogue. How many of us struggle with confrontation? I don't know about you, but even the word confrontation gives me anxiety. Many of us associate the word confrontation with aggression, fighting, discord. And many of us infer negative intent when someone else attempts to confront us when we have done something to harm them. This is especially prevalent when microaggressions are committed against Black or brown folks and they try to bring it to our attention. Oftentimes, white folks' first instinct is to deny and deflect. I didn't mean it that way. So I'm pretty sure we've all heard of the phenomenon of white woman tears. This term was explained to me by a friend of mine as follows. My friend, who is a Black woman, frequently changes her hairstyle. Her boss, a white woman, often remarks about this negatively in the form of statements such as, "I didn't recognize you with your new hair," and "Why can't you stick with a hairstyle?" When my friend brought this to her attention using clear and direct communication, her boss started crying, and my friend ended up having to comfort her when my friend was the one who had actually been wronged. I am here to plead for us white folks to leave our tears and defensiveness at the door. We need to soften our hearts and clear our minds to be receptive to engaging in open, honest dialogue and storytelling if we are to continue our work of building diverse, beloved community. So another story. In the Poetic Edda, which is a collection of poems and stories written in Old Norse dating from the 9th to 12th centuries, we have a wonderful tale called the Lokasenna, often translated as Loki's taunts. Yes, Loki, the both beloved and maligned trickster, agent of chaos, and mover of stories. In modern heathenry, Loki is also venerated as a patron and protector of the queer community, as he is a gender and shapeshifter in many of the sagas. So in the poem Lokasenna, Loki has been kicked out of a feast being served in the hall of the Jotun Aegir because he killed one of Aegir's servants. I would kick him out too. Nevertheless, Loki returns to the hall and proceeds to call out every person present on their wrongdoings and transgressions. Now, I don't recommend following Loki's example in its entirety, but there is something we can learn from this story, including the importance of calling out hypocrisy. There's another take by the scholar John McKennell that Loki is trying to hurry along the inevitable cycle of Ragnarok, the destruction of the gods, the tearing down of the current world so that the new one can be born. This is where we can see the truth of one of the kennings, or titles, for Loki, which is my personal favorite, the mover of stories. Loki is the antidote to stagnation and complacency. So how does this relate to building diverse, beloved community? Loki teaches us to value honesty and open communication. He is, in a certain way, a whistleblower to the hypocrisy of the gods and all who were present at that feast. So the next point I'd like to move on to is visibility. And by this, I mean, what do newcomers to our congregation see? What are various welcome signs versus warning signs? I would encourage us to remember that if you are white, you may not instantly be viewed as safe by someone who is not white. And the same goes for other intersections. Cisgender, heteronormative folks may not be viewed as safe at first by queer and trans members of the community. And I want us to remember the onus is on the white person to create the safe space for the person of color. Hearkening back to my path of inclusive heathenry, there is a huge known problem, historical and current, of heathen symbols being co-opted and corrupted by racists and fascists. There are a lot of long explanations for this, one of them being Hitler's obsession with the works of composer and German nationalist Richard Wagner. But that is definitely a sermon for another time. Long story short, the group of heathens that I regularly practice with, also called a kindred, that's what we call our groups, have systems in place to address welcome signs and warning signs. If a queer person or a person of color walks into one of my kindred's rituals, we want them to feel safe and welcome. My kindred does have a higher percentage than average of queer members, and we are very vocal about that. Advice we give to other kindreds is that if you are out in public representing your heathen path by wearing a Thor's hammer, also called a Mjolnir, perhaps you should consider also wearing a Black Lives Matter pen or some kind of rainbow jewelry or something that helps other folks know that you are an inclusive heathen and a safe person. Symbols matter, and they are relational. Make sure you know the history and meaning of symbols you wish to wear, and have an elevator speech prepared for when folks ask you about them. For example, I have runes tattooed on me. I've had various people ask what they mean, and I have various answers that are all true but specific to the context of who is asking me. If I was talking to someone who I knew or was another pagan, I would explain the meaning of the runes translates roughly to witch of the iron woods. I would not tell my boss that. But it's one of those examples of I know I need to have an explanation for certain things that people might see as warning signs. Unfortunately, it is a truth that heathens have a lot to do to combat the co-opting of our symbols, including runes. So when I wear clothing that allows these runes to be visible, I have to be prepared to explain an appropriate answer as to what the runes mean. In heathenry, our actions make up our reputation, and our reputation is one of our most valuable aspects. I'm known in the communities I am a member of, but outside of those communities, I need to be constantly aware that I may not be viewed as safe at first. And again, that onus is on me to establish the trust and safety between myself and the other community. So now we come to our last point to address: invisibility. Who is not at the table? Whose voices are we not hearing? Who is not in this story? In the anthology, Bringing Race to the Table, Exploring Racism in the Pagan Community, Cleo Ajhana, a Black lesbian pagan, writes that regarding paganism, just because it's alternative does not mean it is free from isms. That is an excellent point for us to all remember as pagans and also as UUs. We all swim in the sea of white supremacy, and we are all raised with cultural biases, even if they are hidden deep in our unconscious. Our work on building diverse, beloved community does not have an end. It isn't a checklist that we can mark off and then walk away from. Some people call this work uncolonization, and it is a lifelong process. I encourage communities to look for the empty places and ask yourself, who isn't here? Who is this community, for whatever reason, not accessible to? Are there physical barriers, such as locations with no ADA-compliant access? Is there a financial barrier to access to that community? Is it not clear enough that the community is an open, safe, inclusive space? Who are we missing, and why? So in conclusion, I believe our next steps are practicing active hospitality. In the ancient world, having a guest and host relational tradition could mean the difference between life and death. Hospitality was paramount. In my heathen practice, I am a devotee of Hel, the Norse goddess of death, and there are 3 main aspects of my devotional work with Hel that I would like to share with you. The first is sovereignty. In the Norse sagas, Hel is appointed by Odin and given authority over 9 worlds on the condition that she shares all of her provisions with those who are sent to her. Hel rules over Helheim, the world of the ancestors, with no consort. She alone is the sovereign queen of the dead. Secondly, I have learned that I believe we have more in common than what separates us. Hel has taught me that death is a unifier and that we all need to live while we are alive. We are all in this together on our beautiful blue planet. The final lesson is hospitality. Hell welcomes everyone to her hall. In the Poetic Edda, there is a poem called Baldur's Drummer, or Baldur's Dream, where Helheim, the world that hell rules over, is presented as a hall, decorated and well furnished for a party awaiting the arrival of Baldur. To me, this implies a rich and hospitable lady taking good care of her guests and her realm. How are we being good hosts? How are we expressing our hospitality and taking care of each other? There are unfortunately two truths that are existing simultaneously. The world is undoubtedly on fire right now, and we can still continue building diverse, beloved community.